Those who disowned their parents, what was the final straw? Story 1. My brother died, and in the days leading up to his funeral, my mother behaved so badly that I stopped fantasizing about hurting her and started imagining my life in prison after killing her. One day, I stood behind her at the top of the stairs while she blamed me for everything. I could have pushed her, but instead I promised myself that, after the funeral, I would never speak to her again. It's been 10 years since I last spoke to her, and my only regret is that I didn't break up with her sooner. Story 2. Briefly and to the point, I was abused by my uncle several times as a child. This caused me a lot of anger issues. I grew up in a single-parent home with no mother involved. Over time, I dealt with some of my trauma and restored my relationship with my mother. I opened up to my siblings and mother about the abuse, but instead of being supported, I was accused of lying. I have been called a liar since childhood and told that my brothers would never do anything wrong. My family rejected me because of this. In the last conversation I said, "You did not protect me as a child. You do not support me now, and you will not protect my children. What is the point of me communicating with you?" Story 3. My mother loves to make me cry. I think it's a way of control, but she always denies that it happens. After 3 years in a row of her deliberately making me cry on my birthday, I asked my father if this year I could avoid her on that day. Let me remind you, I live in another country, so this meant simply not picking up the phone when she called. The father was furious, called me ungrateful, pathetic, a disappointment, and said his biggest regret was that my suicide attempt failed, all because I wanted to have a tear-free birthday. I just hung up without a word, blocked their numbers and email addresses, deleted all social networks. Years have passed, and I'm so grateful that he said all those terrible things because I finally realized how much better my life is without them. Story 4. There wasn't really one specific event. Things just piled up for so long that I stopped trying. My mother was too proud to call me first because, in her opinion, I should have called her. My father decided to cut me out of his life when my wife asked him not to wear shoes in the house. Story 5. It was a long process, but it really ended when my mother tried to sue us for grandparents' rights. Any further communication with her would only help her gather evidence to attempt to legally kidnap our son. When I look at it from the outside, it doesn't seem like much, but it was clear that our relationship was always about me, and everyone else changed their life so that he could do nothing. The final straw was being asked to attend a meeting, which would have meant about 5 hours on the bus each way, missing classes, missing work, and having to find a place to stay. I couldn't stay at my parents' house unless I slept in a sleeping bag on floor, and I did not have a sleeping bag. All this so that my father could again play the role of a happy family in public. I didn't get on the bus. I went to class. I had a bad day at work, but then I slept in my own bed. I didn't plan for it to be forever, but that day, despite all the problems at work, I realized that I would rather do this than pretend to be a happy family. Every day since then has become better than it would have been if he had been in my life. He made good days miserable and bad days intolerable. Story 6. My mother used drugs all her life. I drove 15 hours on a Greyhound bus to Illinois to help her finish some roofing work. After the work was completed, she deliberately started a quarrel with me at the bus station, did not buy me a return ticket, and disappeared with $2,500. At that time, I only had about $30. She then turned off my phone right after she left. I had to walk about 5 miles to a friend's house. He and a few other friends drove me back to Alabama that night. Story 7. When I had a child, I realized that I didn't want them to influence her life in any way. Their influence on my life was bad enough. Story 8. After I told them I was getting a divorce, they told me, 1. My ex will always be a son to them, and they love him more than me, although they later tried to say they love us both. Point 2. That no one else will ever love me, and I will realize that I am ruining my life when I die alone. 3. That they only love me because the Bible tells them to. 4. That they will cut me out of the will and leave everything to my ex, because this proves my mental instability, and as soon as I come to my senses and return to him, everything will be mine again. They emotionally abused me my whole life, but I kept coming back and making excuses for them, which was made worse by the fact that my ex was also an abuser. It's easy to believe that you deserve to be treated poorly when everyone around you tells you so. Ultimately, I realized that I deserve to be happy, and I can't achieve that by staying in a relationship with them. They will never change, and I think they truly believe they are saying these things out of love and don't realize how much they hurt me. Story 9. I didn't want to be a Scientologist anymore. Since childhood, I was taught to believe in this nonsense. It took about 20 years to figure myself out. Story 10. When my father said he didn't blame my brother for trying to stab me, that was the last straw for me. I haven't kept in touch with them for 18 years now, and I don't think that will ever change. Story 11. My mother was arrested for child neglect and animal cruelty. Story 12. She stole my student loan money. I worked so hard to get into college and get a full scholarship, and she stole money that was meant for living expenses and textbooks. This made the first year of study almost unbearable, which greatly affected the next 3 years. Story 13. I left home when I was 16 years old. For example, I was not allowed to be in the house if no one was home, so after school, I had to sit outside for 2-3 hours during the winter months in Minnesota. Summer holidays were even worse. We lived 12 miles from the nearest town in a very rural area. I was only allowed to shower twice a week for 2 minutes. I was only allowed to eat dinner because I got free lunch at school. It's not even the biggest or weirdest things, just everyday ones. For example, about once a week, my father made me pick up everything from the carpet: lint, grass, dog hair, etc. I was not allowed to use a vacuum cleaner or anything else. I had to do it by hand, and if he found something somewhere, I was not allowed to eat. I had one chance, and he just watched me search every room for something on the floor while he watched TV. It was also the only time I was allowed to be in the living room. At the age of 20, I decided to try to restore relations with at least my mother and went to see them for a few days. Again, I wasn't allowed in the house while they were gone. I had to stay in the barn, and I couldn't eat their food, but I wasn't told this, so I didn't bring any food. A few days later, I left and never spoke to them again. This was about 25 years ago. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything valuable. And besides, I had a brother with whom my father did not do this. They bought him clothes, gave him money, helped him buy his first car, and so on. So it was all aimed solely at me. Story 14. When they threatened to ruin my career and prevent my employment by staging an intervention to force me to support their lies. I haven't talked to them for 7 years, and my life has never been better. Story 15. The situation with my abusive parent got to the point where I was so depressed and on edge that I was very close to ending it all. At that moment, I had no choice but to leave. Otherwise, I would have ended up 6 feet underground. My only regret is that I waited until my late 40s to finally leave. I wish I had the courage to do it 30 years earlier. Story 16. For me, it was a matter of respect. When I was pregnant with my first child, I knew that miscarriages were more common than people thought, and I told my mother not to tell anyone. Not to your family, not to anyone. I couldn't stress this more strongly and explained my reasons to her. However, she did not respect my request and told literally everyone. This was the last straw for me, and I couldn't stand it anymore. Story 17. My father has always been a functional alcoholic and retired about 6 years ago. I knew that this would lead to his demise as he would have nothing to do. I stopped calling him after 15 o'clock because it was impossible to communicate with him. Gradually, this time was reduced to noon, and then I just couldn't stand it anymore. I have a half-sister whom he does not recognize and has not spoken to for 40 years. She contacted the family through one of the DNA sites, and my father didn't believe her. He made up a story that they needed to do a paternity test on a 45-year-old man in order to properly draft his will. He then got so drunk that he misread the results and called her, saying he was not her father. Mind you, this all happened because my cousins asked her if she wanted to come to a family reunion and meet them. I told him he needed to get help and apologize. He said he didn't care if he never talked to me again. Then I cut off all ties, and that was about 2 years ago. It's really sad because I miss my dad, but I try to remember him the way he was when I was younger. Story 18. My mother was dying of cancer. She had a restraining order against my father. Her father found her and tried to marry her. A metastatic brain tumor meant she had been barely conscious for the last 6 weeks. We blocked this since my brother and I had medical power of attorney, but allowed him to see her at the hospice as a sign of good faith. One morning I received a call from the hospice and said that I needed to come urgently because my mother was leaving. We were a few minutes late before she died because my father decided to spend half an hour yelling at my brother for locking his bedroom door at night. My father did not come with us to the hospice. When we called him to find out how much he wanted to be involved in organizing the funeral, he took her documents, cards, and phone, and then pretended to be her online for several days, telling her relatives that they should contact him for the real story. I was 22 and my brother was 19 when all this happened. This was the moment when I finally decided that I could not have this person in my life. He continued to escalate the situation after that, but that day became the point of no return. Story 19. My father physically and verbally abused my sister and I when we were children. We were taken and put into foster care, and our mother was finally found, and we went to live with her. For several years, I wanted nothing to do with my father, but around the age of 10, I thought, why not? I started therapy and started talking to him again. Over the next 20 years, I did everything I could to keep him a part of my life. I always called, emailed, texted, arranged our meetings. He was in the military and moved frequently, and he probably initiated contact no more than 5 times. If I didn't call or text first, we might not communicate for months. What finally pushed me to break up was becoming a parent. I would do anything for my children, protect them, and I can't imagine hurting them. It made me think about my relationship with my father, and I realized what a terrible person he is. Yes, I forgave him for everything. But did he do anything to deserve it? Big fat no. I wrote him a long message telling him how I felt, and he replied, but it was complete nonsense. We haven't communicated for 2 years now, and I regret that I didn't do this earlier. Story 20. It's a lot of things put together, but the last straw was the realization and acceptance that they are who they are, without any remorse, and most likely they will never change. Story 21. A couple of days before my wedding to my wife, my mother gave me a long lecture on the morals of being a lesbian. Pretty cocky for a drug addict who stole from me. Story 22. Nothing dramatic. I just sent her a message and they ignored me. After a lot of thinking about how I could have offended her and what I should apologize for, I just let it go. She told herself that if she needed something or had a problem that she wanted to discuss, she would contact me herself. Since then, I haven't heard anything from her. I later learned from my sister that after missing the broadcast of my wedding, she told everyone that I changed the time of my wedding to annoy her. It's funny, of course. It's funny. Story 23. We told my mom that she needed to reconsider her behavior and apologize sincerely. I knew she would try to cover up her behavior by creating a medical emergency and going to the hospital. One evening, she texted my husband and said she thought she had broken her leg and asked him to take her to the hospital. She was fine. I warned my husband that she was trying to manipulate us and told him to be careful. She tried to offer a half-hearted apology, but he interrupted her and said that this was not the right time, that she could apologize when it was not too late, and they were not going to the hospital. The next day, she wrote to her husband something like, I apologized. Can I see my grandchildren now? He reiterated that she needed to offer a sincere apology and reconsider her behavior. An hour and a half later, a police officer knocked on our door because she had called the police to check on the welfare of our children. No, we won't put up with this. It's all over. 2.5 years have passed since then, and these were the calmest years of my life. Besides, everyone said I was psychic when I predicted her next move would be going to the hospital for no reason. It doesn't take a psychic to predict that a person who regularly uses trips to the hospital to get attention will continue to do so. Story 24. My mother had an affair behind my father's back, and they got divorced. I tried to support both of them until my mother started talking about me living with her permanently, meeting her new man, and cutting off my father completely. This was not part of my plans, but I still tried to be there. After some time, I found out that she was using cocaine. Okay, I can forgive that. Then she started asking me, a 14-year-old teenager, for money that I didn't have. Gradually, her concern for me began to matter less than the alimony she would have received if I had taken her side. One day, I came home from my mother's and found my father, drunk out of his mind, with a loaded pistol on the table, sobbing. Seeing how much this destroyed my father and how little it bothered my mother, I decided to break all ties with her. Almost 15 years have passed since then, and I do not regret my decision. Story 25. My father and I were already arguing, via Messenger, when he wrote, "Answer me," regarding the question about my mother, which did not concern him at all. TLDR. During our argument, I mentioned how he bullied me mercilessly as a teenager and forced me to hide my face when I watched TV with my family, so he wouldn't have to see my tics due to Tourette's syndrome. His only response was to say that I did not have Tourette's syndrome. It was one of the worst periods of my life, and then I really asked myself the question of why I should continue to communicate with him. So now I don't communicate. Sorry for the long sentences. Story 26. My parents constantly tried to force me to divorce my wife of 15 years. She has BPD and is recovering from a very traumatic childhood. I understand this and support her, even on difficult days. My parents consider her a psychopath and unworthy of my time, even though I am happy with her and we work hard on our relationship despite personal problems and shortcomings. Parents see it this way. She's broken. Leave her. It's horrible. I'm proud of how far she's come over the years we've been together, and when my parents gave me the choice of her or us, I stopped communicating with them. Story 27. It was a long process. As I grew older, I began to realize that I could not allow my mother to continue to affect my mental health with her narcissistic abuse. Leaving was difficult, but continuing to tolerate her abuse would be even more difficult. Story 28. My father left my mother and me when I was 2 years old, divorced her long distance when I was 6. At 30, I found him, and we started talking. He told me about the brother I had, and made it seem like I was part of the family. When we talked on the phone, he kept telling stories about my brother. After about 6 months, I realized that he had never given me the opportunity to meet or talk to my brother, and I suspected that he had never mentioned my existence to my brother. He got angry and said it was offensive, but eventually admitted that it was true. My brother grew up into his 20s not knowing I existed, and my father got angry at me. He hid his first marriage and child from his second family their entire lives. I eventually met them and we developed a good relationship, but my father never spoke to me again because calling him a liar was the most toxic thing he had ever experienced. He was an educator all his life, and when he died, I wasn't even mentioned in the obituary, but it talks about how he helped children all his life. Well, except for his own child. Story 29. Generational trauma and religious trauma were the two main reasons for my poor relationship with my parents, with the constant need to maintain external facades and never feeling good enough for them coming in second. Not to mention the clear lack of respect for my time and personal space. When I came out, it caused a strong negative reaction from them. You brought great dishonor to your family and created a nightmare for your mother, and so on. They started writing to me once a week to reproach me. After that, I changed my name, changed all my documents, left my old phone, completely cleaned at their house, and left their life. Story 30. Every time she called, I felt sick with anxiety. Even if the conversation was simple and not abusive, she still completely ruined my day. Even just seeing a message from her after class sent me into a spiral of anxiety. The three most important people in my life came to me and said, "We can't let this go on." One of them was my best friend's mother. She told me a story about how, while a friend of mine was pregnant, she began to have problems getting pregnant because of the anxiety her own mother was causing her. She realized that she would either lose the child or break off her relationship with her mother, and decided that she could handle the loss of the past, but she could not afford to lose the future. She simply told her story without commenting on my situation, and it helped. Almost 15 years have passed, and I have never regretted that I stopped communicating. Story 31. Over time, everything accumulated: chaos and disrespect. I questioned why I tolerated this relationship when it was seriously affecting my mental health. One day, I decided that I had enough. I still miss that figure in my life, not him, and I'm sad that I never got the father I needed and that we all deserve. Someone who will be a reliable supporter, who supports and does not destroy, who tells you every day that you are worthy of love just the way you are. Story 32. TLDR. I stopped communicating with my mother, my only living parent, when I found out that she tried to stop my wedding with my current wife, not because she considered the marriage bad, but because she was not invited to the wedding. We eloped. After we announced our intention to get married and have a wedding ceremony in court with only 2 witnesses, very close friends, no family, my mother called me regularly, coming up with reasons why I should not marry my fiancé. All of these reasons were offensive, such as that my fiancé was a gold digger, had mental problems, or was using me to get permanent residence. I'm British, my wife is American. During each call, I argued with my mother. She began to cry when she realized that I would not change my mind, and then ended the conversation. We got married, everything was perfect, and then had wedding receptions in the UK for all our British friends and family, and a second reception in the US for everyone we knew there. For my appointment in the UK, my mother arrived very late, so much so that everyone in the room noticed her arrival. She hardly spoke to my wife or me, but otherwise she didn't make a scene. About a year after we got married, I realized that my mother and wife never built a good relationship, unlike my brother and his wife, who got married the same year. I decided to have a serious conversation with my mother to try to start over. During this conversation, my mother completely pretended that she did not remember any unpleasant calls. She claimed that she had never done them, and that she was not capable of such things at all. Accordingly, she had nothing to apologize for because she had done nothing wrong. She became upset at my suggestion that she could make such calls, left the room, and then returned to tell me something that seemed inappropriate at the time. My parents' marriage was not a happy one. My father died about 10 years ago, and my mom quickly reverted to using her maiden name. But I was informed that the only thing that helped my mother get through this marriage was waiting for the day when she would see her sons get married. It was an odd line in an already frantic conversation, so I again explained the many reasons we ran away, none of which satisfied my mother. Then the COVID pandemic hit, and there was no attempt to bring my wife and mother together by meeting in person. Instead, I thought about that crazy conversation again. It finally dawned on me. My mother didn't believe any of the reasons she gave against my marriage to my wife. She couldn't or wouldn't remember what she said because the real reasons didn't matter. She just didn't want me to marry my wife, hoping that I would meet someone else who wanted a traditional wedding. The fact that she was trying to stop my marriage to the woman I love was less important to her than her own feelings about her marriage. So I wrote a letter to my mother saying that until she apologized for trying to interfere with my marriage, I did not want to be in a relationship with her. Several years have passed since then, and my mother has not spoken to me. So apparently, this is forever. Story 33. My father only contacted me 3 times before I was 15. He suddenly realized his mortality and reconnected with my brothers and me as if nothing had happened. They took him back in a friendly manner, but I couldn't do it. Over time, he began constantly asking for money and claiming that he played a role in our upbringing, which eventually led to my brothers cutting ties with him as well. Maybe I'm being petty, but I see my silence as karma for his past actions, considering he has 6 children and I'm the only daughter. Story 34. After cutting off contact several times, it finally came together when my father died and I had to fly across the country. I left my children with my mother, and she told them I abandoned them and then kidnapped my oldest and left her in another state with another family member. I haven't spoken to her for almost 3 years, and it's very nice. Story 35. My mother left my father and me when I was 5 years old. From the moment she left, I craved her love and attention. My father was a decent man, but he didn't care much about me emotionally. My mom eventually married her lover, who turned out to be a jerk. He left his wife and kids for her and never wanted to see me around. And she continued to manipulate me for 20 years, with drops of attention, occasional short visits, and calls where she was sad that we weren't closer. After her husband died, the calls became more frequent, and she would say indifferent but extremely hurtful things or be drunk and cry about how much she missed me. These calls were unbearably painful. Every time we ended a conversation, I would just break down and cry from the pain of the relationship I wanted to have and the need for a mother's love that never went away. A lot of bad things have happened over the years, and I always knew that it would be easier to get through it if I had a mother who cared about me, who would listen and help me. The defining moment came at my wedding. We had a small wedding on the beach, and my mom decided to show up and play the role of mother of the bride, a title she clearly didn't deserve to be. She got involved in special moments reserved for my partner's mom and my stepmom, which really annoyed me. After the wedding and honeymoon, I sent her a letter in which I wrote that I no longer wanted to communicate with her. I listed the many bad things she had done and the way she had let me down. I told her that she made me scared of the thought of having my own children because I wouldn't know how to be a good mom, or that I might abandon them like she did to me. I told her that her presence in my life was causing me too much pain. More than 20 years have passed, and I am at peace with this decision. Story 36. This is a very difficult experience that you went through with your biological father, and no one should have to experience such things. His actions were incredibly terrible, and the pain and trauma he caused is deep and long-lasting. You made the courageous decision to cut all ties with him and legally change your name to distance yourself from his influence. This choice reflects your strength and determination to protect yourself from further harm. If he continues to harass you despite your clear boundaries, it is important to prioritize your safety and well-being. Consider seeking support from trusted friends, family members, or even legal authorities if necessary to ensure your protection. Your determination and resilience in standing up to him is admirable. Remember that you have every right to live your life free from his toxic presence and build a future filled with positivity and healing. Story 37. He got on the plane. Growing up, he was never particularly fond of me or involved in my life. We never spent time together as a family, went on vacation, or flew to visit other relatives. When I was a child, I did not understand this, and when I grew up, I treated it as a possible manifestation of autism, but I still tried to maintain a relationship with his grandchildren. Then, after he divorced my mom and reconnected with his high school girlfriend, I realized that he was capable of truly caring about people and their happiness. He just didn't show enough interest in me or my children. When he got on the plane to visit this woman, I realized all of this. Story 38. I took the child with me, and one of the mothers began to tune him into QAnon. Another mom, who seems to be crazy and hears voices, cut my child's hair without asking, which caused a lot of problems. The mothers in my life constantly put my children in danger. I didn't want such strict boundaries, but I was tired of trying to fix it. Story 39. My sister said a terrible thing to me, and my mother insisted that I apologize for causing her stress. At that time, we were 30 years old, and I just left. It's been a year, and I haven't spoken to any of them. Story 40. It was a gradual development. When I was younger, my mother could be very charming and loving, but with occasional outbursts of physical and emotional abuse. As I grew older, this balance flipped, and I began to study personality disorders. My wife and I realized that we both grew up with toxic narcissistic mothers, supported by weak fathers who tried to please the crazy man and keep their own lives calm, even if it was to the detriment of the children. Several years into our marriage, my mother-in-law left hours of recordings on our answering machine. She filled our mailbox with her attacks, wishes for our bankruptcy, and my death. My wife stopped contact with her parents, and her life began to improve noticeably. Another 20 years later, we did the same with my parents, but my mother went deeper into a conservative hole, which only increased her negative behavior. We separated for 9 years and enjoyed a quiet, drama-free life. Then, a year before they died, I got a call saying they would become wards of the state if I didn't become their trustee. They allowed their live-in caregiver to get involved in their affairs. I decided to stick it out and make sure they were well cared for and able to stay at home. By then, unknown to me, my mother was suffering from dementia, and my father, an avid reader, had lost his sight. Surprisingly, caring for them at the end of life was a great experience. My mother's narcissism disappeared with dementia, and she became charming and hilarious. My father became loving and apologetic. I think he was surprised that I decided to take responsibility after everything that happened. However, I don't regret cutting off contact with them. Anyone who says blood is thicker than water is lying. Family often brings the deepest wounds. Story 41. This is an incredibly difficult experience that you have faced. Born into the cult, you faced dire circumstances starting when you were only 10 years old and were married off to a 34-year-old man as his third wife due to the onset of menstruation. Almost at the age of 13, you were kidnapped from this sect and taken to live with a former member of the sect. Having gone through deprogramming, you survived a suicide attempt at age 16 because of what you experienced. And you're still here. You're alive. Now you are almost 50 years old, and you don't know if your parents or your brothers and sisters are alive. It's incredibly powerful and deep. I believe that you are a person with great strength and endurance to survive such difficult trials. Your story is one of resilience and survival, and I hope that you have found or will find the support and love you deserve in the rest of your life. Story 42. What about the evil, narcissistic, selfish, insane, manipulative grandmother? She harmed the entire family from the moment my mother was born. Often she told her that she was a mistake. After the wicked witch left the hospital after hip surgery, and only because my mom asked for another chance, I helped her with things due to her immobility. She was stubborn about taking help, and she told me that horrible man. I told her that there was a special place in hell for people like her, and that was it. The day she died, I felt nothing for her. Only relief from my mom that she wouldn't have to deal with that bastard anymore. Story 43. He condemned me to hell because I was a disobedient daughter. The last thing he told me on the phone was that he disinherited me, all because I refused to help him defraud the government to get disability benefits. More than 10 years have passed. I hope he regrets being single, but I doubt narcissists have any regrets. Story 44. He got into my things without asking, and then continued to talk bad about me in front of my mother, who in turn did not stand up for me. As for the contents of my things, there were many religious books, which he did not like at all as a devout Catholic. At that time, I was just beginning to study anthropology, but today I'm an anthropologist. Story 45. They did not inform me about the time of my grandmother's funeral. My father is not malicious. I don't think so, at least. He just doesn't think. He was in touch with me on the day of her death, and even for several days after that. He told me that he would let me know when the funeral was so that my brother and I could come. But I never did. I found out about the funeral 5 days before it from my cousin, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, who wrote to me asking why I wasn't coming. I told her I didn't even know the funeral was next week. I had to quickly notify my mother and brother in the hope that we could all come. We all moved from the area where my grandmother lived. Luckily, we managed to arrive and book several hotel rooms. But when I saw my father at the funeral, I just felt it. Disappointment. Huge disappointment. It's strange because I saw my grandmother about a month before she died, when she ended up in the hospital. I came specifically to see her, decided to spend the whole day there and meet an old friend in the middle of the day. My grandmother told me while I was there that my father would be coming in an hour. I didn't really want to see him, due to the previous times he had let me down. And my grandmother said that I thought it was stupid that I was still angry at him over petty things, even though they weren't petty to me. I told her I just wasn't ready to talk to him yet, but maybe one day I would be. I wonder how she would feel if she knew he didn't tell me about her funeral, that 2 of her grandchildren almost missed the opportunity to say goodbye, either through ineptitude or malice. Although I prefer to believe the former, my father is stupid, but he is not a malicious type. I don't know, but I'm still not ready to talk to him about it. Maybe I never will, and I tell myself that this is normal too. Story 46. My case is not as bad as some of these comments, but I decided to share it anyway. I can't say that they disowned me, but rather they simply ignored me, as I think. I am the only one of my siblings who cut ties with my father because he had a terrible habit of constantly asking me for money every time he called, even during the times when he knew I was having financial difficulties. And if I refused him money, he started asking for a million other random services that were also somehow related to money, like dinners or shopping. I supported this game for about 2 years before finally ending the relationship. My parents divorced when I was a child, and my father married a few years later to a woman who had a 2-story house and an above-average income. But my father never got rid of his nasty habit, despite the fact that he was in the best financial situation than his own children. After he realized that he could no longer contact me, he began pestering my brother every week with requests for money. But I know that soon, my brother will either face him or cut off all ties, just like me. This guy is a crazy parasite who just can't stop. P.S. To be clear, my father did not have any addictions or financial problems that could explain his penchant for begging. He just loved spending money and being provided for by his children. Story 47. My relationship with my father has always been tense. My brother is gay, I am bisexual, and my father is a MAGA supporter and Republican who lives out of town. He once told me that he didn't want to be the father of a gay son. That is, a father who has to fight in a bar because someone said the word fag. But the last straw was when he turned his Facebook page into a page where he called for the assassination of Nancy Pelosi, and I said to myself, he is lost to me. Story 48. So many things. These were years of Munchausen-type emotional abuse and sacrifice. I realized that I had to leave to live the life I wanted. Only now, looking back, do I understand how terrible it was. The final straw came when, after leaving the psychiatric clinic, my parents and brothers wanted me to sign a guardianship. I found this offensive, and I realized that if I signed, my life would end. I met my partner and left after 6 months. I can't say it was the smartest choice, but in the end, everything worked out, and I felt better. I'm doing what I was told I couldn't do. I know it was necessary for me. Story 49. Not me, but my wife. There was no last straw. It was death by 1,000 scissors. The wife's mother tried to control her wedding to her first husband by buying many things that the wife did not want. The wife's mother hosts family events to which she invites other family members, including the wife's brother, without inviting us. My wife's mother criticizes her cousin for being intimate and meeting once a month for brunch because we love food and have to sneak around each other to spend time together. The wife's mother sends her messages saying that she deserves more respect from her wife. My wife's stepmother, after her father remarried, also does not invite us to family events because we did not agree to give away the details of our wedding planning under her pressure. She would pick them apart and criticize them. My wife's stepmother decorates her house and there are pictures of her own children everywhere, but there are none of my wife or her brother. The wife is pregnant, and the wife's stepmother scolds her brother and daughter-in-law for what they are doing for the child. The wife and her brother complain to the father, who did nothing to protect them both. In addition, despite the fact that the wife's mother and father do not get along with each other and did not speak for many years until our wedding came due to the infidelity of the mother's father, the mother and stepmother get along well with each other.